Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I paid a dark web hitman to hunt me as a dare. Last night, I found a note under my pillow that said, "Soon." Okay, so before I get into this, let me just say, I know how dumb this sounds. I know. You don't need to tell me that what I did was the stupidest thing anyone could possibly do. Believe me, I've been beating myself up about it ever since. But at the time, it felt like a joke. Something so far out there that it couldn't possibly be real. I guess I should start from the beginning. My name's Ryan, and I'm one of those people who's always trying to one-up my friends. Like, you know the guy who always has to take a dare one step further just because he doesn't want to look like a coward? That's me. Or, well, that was me. It all started 2 weeks ago when my friends and I were hanging out at Starbucks. We were just chilling, talking about the dumbest stuff like we always do. My friend Jake brought up this TikTok he had seen where people dared each other to visit creepy websites on the dark web. He started hyping it up, saying stuff like, "Dude, I bet half those websites are fake, and it's just a bunch of urban legends. I wish I'd just let it go. I really do." But instead, I leaned back in my chair and said, "If it's so fake, why don't we make it interesting?" Jake raised an eyebrow, and I could already tell he was waiting for me to suggest something reckless. So, of course, I went there. "Let's go on the dark web," I said, "and see if we can hire a hitman, but not like to kill someone else. What if we dared them to hunt us instead?" At first, everyone just laughed. Emma, the only sane person in our group, looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Ryan, that's literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard," she said. "You know how dangerous that is, right?" But Jake wasn't laughing anymore. He leaned forward, his face all serious now, and said, "Okay, but what if it's not fake? What if someone actually takes the job?" And that's when I said the words that still haunt me. "Then I guess we'll find out." Jake is the kind of guy who doesn't back down from a challenge, so before I even had time to rethink my decision, he was pulling out his laptop. Emma tried to talk us out of it, but she might as well have been talking to a brick wall. We found a Tor browser, downloaded it. Don't ask me why Jake already knew how to do this, and started poking around. Most of the websites looked like trash, just blank pages with creepy logos or weird code that didn't make any sense. And then we found it. A website called Red Veil Services. The homepage was super basic, just a black screen with a blood red logo that looked like a skull dripping with paint. Below the logo, there was a single sentence in all caps: "For every request, there is a price." Jake clicked on it, and a list of services popped up. Some of them were exactly what you'd expect. Basic hitman for hire stuff. But others were different. One of them caught my eye right away. The Hunt. Dare to be prey. I laughed when I saw it. It sounded like something straight out of a bad horror movie. Jake clicked on it before I could say anything, and a form popped up asking for details. Name, age, location, the basics. And then, in bold letters at the bottom, payment required to confirm. We were all hyped up at this point, and the coffee wasn't helping. Jake turned to me and said, You're really gonna do this, right? Or are you all talk? I wasn't about to back down in front of everyone, so I pulled out my phone and Venmo'd him $200 to cover the Bitcoin payment. I remember thinking that it was just a dumb joke, like I'd get an email the next day saying, "Congrats, you've been pranked," or something. Once Jake submitted the form, a loading screen popped up with a little spinning skull. A few seconds later, the screen went black, and then this message appeared: "The hunt begins." That's when things started to get weird. The first night, I didn't think much of it. I kept checking my email and my phone, expecting some kind of follow-up, but nothing happened. I figured that was the end of it. The website was probably fake, and I'd wasted $200 on a prank. But then, the next day, I got a text. It was from an unknown number, and all it said was, "Soon." At first, I thought Jake was messing with me. I called him right away, but he swore up and down that it wasn't him. "Dude, I don't even have your number saved in my burner phone," he said. "It's probably just a spam text or something." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my chest, like I'd just stepped into quicksand and couldn't get out. I tried to brush it off, but things only got worse from there. The second night, I noticed something strange. When I came home from work, the window in my bedroom was open. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building, and I never open that window because it doesn't have a screen. At first, I thought maybe I'd just forgotten to close it, but then I saw the scratch marks on the window frame, like someone had used a tool to force it open. I didn't sleep at all that night. By the 3rd day, I was starting to freak out. Every time I checked my phone, there was another text from the same unknown number. Sometimes it was just a single word like "soon" or "watch," but other times it was more specific. One of them said, "Nice shirt, by the way." I was wearing a blue hoodie that day, and I hadn't posted any pictures online. I started to feel like I was being watched everywhere I went. I told Jake and Emma about it, but they just laughed it off. Jake said I was overreacting, and Emma told me I was probably just paranoid because of the dare. But then, last night, I found the note. It was under my pillow. A single sheet of paper with one word written in blocky, uneven letters. "Soon." I didn't sleep at all after that. I've been pacing around my apartment all day, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling the cops, but what am I supposed to tell them? "Hi, I paid a hitman on the dark web to hunt me for fun, and now I'm scared it might be real." They'd laugh me out of the station, and the worst part is, I don't even know if this is real, or if someone's just screwing with me. But if it is real, what happens when the hunt is over? Because I think I'm starting to understand something. The hunt doesn't end when they catch you. It ends when they win. And I have no idea what that means. After finding that note, I didn't just feel scared. I felt hunted, like some invisible predator was circling closer with every second. I thought about staying at a friend's place, but the thing is, none of them would take me seriously. Jake would probably just crack another joke about it, and Emma would roll her eyes and tell me to call a therapist. So I did what I thought was the next best thing. I stayed awake all night. Every single light in my apartment was on. My kitchen knives were spread out on the counter, and I sat there clutching a baseball bat like I was about to hit a home run off the boogeyman. I don't even play baseball. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was another text. Same unknown number. This time, it wasn't just one word. "Did you enjoy the note?" My heart started hammering in my chest. This wasn't just someone trying to mess with me. They knew. They'd been here, in my apartment, in my bedroom. The note wasn't some random coincidence. It was a message, and now I knew for sure that this was real. Before I could even process it, another text came through. "Let's make it interesting." I stared at my phone, my palms sweating. I didn't want to respond. I didn't even want to acknowledge it. But something inside me snapped. I texted back, "Who the hell are you?" It took less than a second for the reply to come. "I'm the end of the game. I don't know what possessed me to leave my apartment, but I couldn't stay there any longer. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. Every creak in the floorboards made my stomach twist. I grabbed my car keys and bolted. I didn't even bother packing anything. I just drove. I had no destination in mind, no plan. I just needed to get as far away as possible. For the first few hours, nothing happened. I drove down empty highways, stopping only to grab snacks or gas at 24-hour convenience stores. It was almost peaceful, like maybe I'd outrun whatever this was. But then I noticed the car. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck, the kind you'd see in horror movies, where the villain doesn't say a word, but just stares at you with dead eyes. At first, I thought it was just another driver heading the same way, but then it stayed behind me, for miles. No matter how many turns I took, no matter how fast or slow I went, the truck was always there, just far enough back to be ominous, but close enough that I couldn't ignore it. I thought about pulling over, but what would I even do? Ask them if they were stalking me. I kept driving, my pulse pounding in my ears. Finally, I decided to test them. I pulled into a McDonald's parking lot, grabbed my phone, and walked inside. I didn't even buy anything. I just sat down at one of the sticky tables by the window and watched. Sure enough, the truck pulled in a few minutes later. The driver didn't get out. They just parked near the entrance and sat there. I couldn't see their face through the tinted windows, but I could feel their eyes on me. That's when I realized I'd made a mistake. By stopping, I'd cornered myself, and whoever was in that truck knew it. I pretended to text someone while I tried to figure out what to do. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type. I sent a quick message to Jake. "I think someone's following me. Not a joke. Help." No response. The truck door opened. My stomach dropped as a man stepped out. He wasn't what I expected. No black trench coat, no ski mask. He was wearing a dirty flannel shirt and ripped jeans, like a guy you'd see fixing a fence in the middle of nowhere. But there was something wrong about him, something off. His movements were slow and deliberate, like he wasn't in a rush because he already knew how this would end. I tried to stay calm as he walked into the McDonald's, but when he stopped at the counter and didn't even look at me, I started to doubt myself. Maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe I was just paranoid. Then my phone buzzed. "Nice try, Ryan." I froze. The man turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at me out of the corner of his eye. His face was blank, expressionless, like he was studying me, cataloging every move I made. I didn't wait to find out what he'd do next. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door. The truck was still parked outside, but I didn't care. I jumped in my car, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost crashed into a light pole. The texts didn't stop after that. Every hour, a new one would pop up. "You can't run. You look scared. Almost time." And then, last night, the worst one yet. "Check your back seat." I almost swerved off the road when I read it. My heart was in my throat as I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone crouched there, grinning at me. But it was empty. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the fear was messing with my head. But when I stopped at a rest area to catch my breath, I noticed something on the back seat that hadn't been there before. A Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me, sitting in my car, from behind. I turned around, my head snapping back and forth, but the parking lot was empty. Just rows of cars and flickering streetlights. I grabbed the photo and shoved it in my pocket, my hand shaking so badly I could barely move. Now I'm sitting in a crappy motel room in the middle of nowhere, writing this. The door is locked, the curtains are closed, and I've got a chair wedged under the doorknob, but I don't think it'll matter. Whoever this is, they know where I am. They've been watching me the whole time. And the worst part? I got another text about an hour ago. You've been fun to watch, Ryan, but I think it's time for the finale. There's a knock at the door. The knock at the door wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. It was slow and deliberate, like the person on the other side was letting me know they had all the time in the world. I sat there frozen, my breath stuck in my throat. I wanted to believe it was just someone from the motel, maybe housekeeping, or some drunk guest who'd knocked on the wrong door. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew. The knock came again. This time, it was followed by a voice. Ryan, it said, I know you're in there. The voice was calm, unnaturally calm. No anger, no impatience, just a cold, steady tone, like someone talking about the weather. My entire body locked up. It wasn't someone I recognized, but there was something in the way they said my name that sent chills down my spine. I did the first thing that came to mind. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd brought with me from the car and pressed myself against the far wall of the room. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could barely keep my grip on the handle. I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any second, but it didn't. Instead, the voice spoke again. Do you know what I love about this game, Ryan? It asked. The anticipation, the waiting, watching you squirm. The silence that followed was deafening. My heartbeat was so loud, it felt like the walls were pulsing with it. I didn't say a word. I didn't dare move. You thought you could run, the voice continued. That was cute, but you can't hide from me. You were mine the moment you clicked that button. Another knock. This one was louder, firmer. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, the voice said. If you don't open this door by then, I'll come in myself. And trust me, you don't want that. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mind was racing 1,000 miles a minute, trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Should I try to climb out the window? Should I fight? The window was my first thought. The motel room was on the ground floor, and the parking lot was just a few steps away. But when I moved to pull the curtains aside, I froze. The truck was parked right outside, and it wasn't empty. There was a figure sitting in the driver's seat, barely visible through the glass. They weren't moving, just sitting there, watching. My escape route was gone before it even started. The police? Sure, I could call them, but what was I supposed to say? Hi, I hired a hitman on the dark web, and now he's at my motel room? Even if they believed me, they wouldn't get here in time. That left only one option: fight. I tightened my grip on the bat and moved toward the door as quietly as I could. My knees felt like jelly, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Nothing. And then Without warning, the knob rattled. "Time's up," the voice said, almost cheerfully. The door didn't burst open like I expected. Instead, there was a soft click. My heart sank. The lock. He'd picked the lock. I barely had time to react before the door swung open. The man standing there wasn't the guy from the truck. He was taller, leaner, dressed in all black. His face was partially obscured by a hoodie, but I could see just enough to notice the blank expression. No anger, no excitement, just cold, calculated indifference. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him as casually as if he were walking into his own living room. He didn't even look at me at first, just scanned the room like he was taking inventory. "Nice place," he said. His voice was just as calm as it had been on the other side of the door. "Shame it's your last stop." I didn't think. I swung the bat with everything I had, aiming straight for his head. But he was fast. Too fast. He ducked to the side, and the bat slammed into the door frame with a crack that made my hand sting. Before I could recover, he lunged at me. I stumbled backward, the bat slipping from my grip as his hand closed around my throat. He didn't squeeze, just held me there, pinned against the wall, his face inches from mine. "You don't even know what you've done, do you?" he said, his tone almost mocking. "This isn't a game, Ryan. This is a lesson." He let go suddenly, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. My hand scrambled for the bat, but he kicked it away before I could reach it. "You thought this was funny," he said, pacing the room. "A little thrill, a way to prove to your friends that you're not a coward." He stopped and looked down at me, his eyes like ice. "But this is real, and the only way out is when I say it's over." I wanted to say something, beg, scream, anything, but my voice wouldn't work. All I could do was watch as he pulled something out of his pocket. It was small, metallic, and glinting under the dim light. A knife. My stomach twisted. "You should have read the fine print," he said, crouching down in front of me. "The hunt doesn't end when you run. It ends when I win. And you know what winning looks like." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "It looks like this." Before he could do anything, there was a loud bang from outside. It sounded like a gunshot. The man froze, his head snapping toward the window. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Irritation. He stood up and moved to the window, peeking through the curtains. "Stay here," he said, without looking back. And then he was gone, slipping out the door as quickly as he'd come in. I didn't wait to find out what was happening. As soon as the door clicked shut, I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the bat. My entire body was trembling, but I forced myself to move. I threw the curtains aside, and my stomach dropped. The truck was still there, but the driver's side door was open. A man was lying on the ground next to it, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled around him, glinting under the flickering streetlights. And standing over him was another figure. This one was different, taller, bulkier, wearing some kind of mask, white, featureless, and utterly terrifying. They were holding something long and heavy, like a crowbar or a pipe, and they were staring straight at the motel room window, straight at me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my keys and bolted, my mind racing with questions I didn't have answers to. Who was the second figure? Why had they killed the driver? And most importantly, what happens when the hunt is over? I didn't even think. I just ran. The baseball bat was still in my hand, my knuckles white from gripping it so hard. but it felt like a twig compared to the sheer terror clawing at my chest. I sprinted through the parking lot, barely registering the crunch of gravel under my shoes or the way the cold night air cut into my lungs. My only thought was to get as far away from that motel as possible. But as I turned the corner onto the highway, I made the mistake of looking back. The figure in the mask was still standing there, their head tilted ever so slightly to the side, like they were studying me. And then, just as I thought they'd stay rooted to the spot, they moved. It wasn't a sprint. It wasn't even a run. It was a slow, deliberate walk, like they knew exactly how this would end, and there was no need to rush. The confidence in that movement terrified me, more than if they'd come charging after me. I didn't stick around to see how close they'd get. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and floored it. My tires screeched against the asphalt as I sped away, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The masked figure was gone, but that didn't mean I was safe. Not by a long shot. I don't remember how long I drove. Hours, maybe. The highway seemed endless, a dark ribbon cutting through an empty void. My phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it in the chaos, and the radio was nothing but static. It was just me, the hum of the engine, and the growing weight in my chest that told me this wasn't over. Every car I passed felt like a threat. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror made my stomach twist. At one point, I pulled off onto a side road just to see if anyone would follow me. No one did, but the silence that followed was almost worse. It was like the world had gone completely still, waiting for something to happen. I found a diner just as the first slivers of dawn were creeping over the horizon. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Neon lights flickering, peeling wallpaper, a waitress who looked like she'd been working the night shift for the last 3 decades. But it felt like a lifeline. I parked as close to the entrance as I could and went inside, clutching the baseball bat like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The waitress gave me a weird look as I slid into a booth near the back, but she didn't say anything. She probably thought I was some drifter, maybe a little unhinged, but harmless. She was wrong. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and stared out the window, watching for any sign of movement. The truck was gone. The masked figure was gone. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could almost breathe again. Almost. The waitress came by with the check, and as she set it down, she gave me this strange look, like she wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if she should. Finally, she leaned in close and whispered, "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't know how to respond. What was I supposed to say? That I was being hunted by someone or something that didn't seem entirely human? That I'd paid for this nightmare to happen because I thought it was a joke? I managed a weak smile and said, "Yeah, just a rough night." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and walked away. I watched her go, my eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. Everything seemed normal, too normal, and then I saw it. On the table, tucked under the edge of the check, was a Polaroid photo. My blood ran cold as I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was me, sitting in the booth, from just a few minutes ago. I dropped the photo like it burned me and whipped around, searching for whoever had left it. The diner was almost empty. A couple of truckers at the counter, the waitress refilling someone's coffee. No one was watching me. No one even looked suspicious. But someone had been there. Someone had taken that photo. I left the diner in a panic, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to keep moving. Sitting still felt like painting a target on my back. The highway was busier now, the morning rush starting to trickle in. Cars zipped past me as I drove aimlessly, my eyes darting between the road and the mirrors. I tried to convince myself that the photo didn't mean anything, that it was just another scare tactic. But deep down, I knew better. Whoever was doing this wasn't just following me. They were toying with me, watching me, letting me know that no matter where I went, they'd always be one step ahead. I kept driving until I reached a rest stop. It was a little nicer than the ones I'd seen before. Clean bathrooms, a small gift shop, even a vending machine that wasn't completely out of order. I parked as close to the building as I could and got out, my legs feeling like they'd been replaced with rubber. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. There was no one there. Not behind the counter, not in the aisles, not even in the bathrooms. It was like the entire place had been abandoned, but the lights were still on, and the faint sound of music was playing over the speakers. It felt staged, like someone had set it up just for me. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. I yanked on it, my panic rising, but it was locked. Somehow, without me even noticing, they'd locked me inside. That's when I saw the second Polaroid. It was taped to the glass of the vending machine. My heart dropped as I peeled it off and looked at it. It was a photo of me, standing at the door, holding the bat. Someone had just taken it. A sound came from the back of the store, a faint scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. I turned slowly, my grip tightening on the bat, and saw the figure from the motel. The same black hoodie, the same blank expression, only now they weren't alone. The masked figure was with them. They stood side by side, blocking the only exit, and for the first time, I realized what this was. This wasn't a game. It wasn't even a hunt. It was an execution. I stood frozen, the bat trembling in my hands. The two figures didn't move. They just stood there, side by side, like they were savoring the moment. The man in the hoodie was calm, his face devoid of any emotion. The masked figure, though, that one tilted its head again, the featureless white surface of the mask seeming to mock me, to dare me to make a move. The store felt suffocating, the walls too close, the lights too bright. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight both of them. My thoughts raced, searching for a way out, but there was nothing. I was trapped. Then, the man in the hoodie broke the silence. "You know what I hate, Ryan?" he said, his voice echoing in the empty store. "Cowards." He took a step forward, his boots scraping against the tiled floor. I tightened my grip on the bat, my palms slick with sweat. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to swing, to fight, but I couldn't. My arms felt like lead. "You had a choice," he continued. "You could have walked away. You could have lived your life like a normal person. But no, you just had to play the game." Another step. The masked figure stayed behind, motionless like a statue. "You wanted a thrill," the man said, his tone mocking. "You wanted to see what it felt like to be hunted. Well," he gestured around the room with a slow, deliberate sweep of his hand. "How does it feel, Ryan? Are you having fun yet?" My throat was dry. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was shake my head, my knees threatening to give out beneath me. "No?" He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "That's a shame, because I'm having a blast." Without warning, he lunged at me. I swung the bat wildly, but he caught it mid-swing with one hand. His grip was like a vice, and before I could pull away, he yanked it out of my hands and tossed it across the room. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. He didn't rush me. He didn't need to. He just advanced slowly, his eyes locked on mine. "You think you're the first idiot to do this," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're special. You're not. You're just another name on a list." I backed into a shelf, the sharp edges digging into my spine. I could hear my breath coming in short, ragged gasps, each one louder than the last. "And the best part," he continued, leaning in close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. "You paid for this. You asked for this." Something inside me snapped. I don't know if it was fear or desperation or pure adrenaline, but I shoved him as hard as I could and made a break for it. He stumbled back, caught off guard, and I darted toward the masked figure, hoping, praying that I could slip past them and get to the door. But the masked figure moved faster than I thought possible. Before I could react, they grabbed me by the arm and slammed me into the counter. Pain exploded across my back, and I cried out, my vision swimming. I tried to twist free, but their grip was like iron. "Not so fast," the man in the hoodie said, his voice filled with amusement. "We're not done yet." The masked figure held me down while the man walked over, pulling something from his pocket. It was a phone. My phone. I don't even know when they took it. He held it up, the screen glowing faintly, and tapped a few buttons. "You know what's funny, Ryan?" he said, his tone almost conversational. "Your little friends, they think this is hilarious. Look." He turned the screen toward me, and my stomach dropped. It was a video of me, sitting in the diner, standing in the parking lot, running through the rest stop. Every moment of terror I'd experienced had been captured on camera. The caption underneath was simple: "The hunt." And the comments. God, the comments. People were laughing, cheering, placing bets on how long I'd lost. One of them even asked for my address, as if they were planning to join in. "You're a star," the man said, grinning. "Everyone's rooting for you." He tossed the phone onto the counter, and the masked figure let me go. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with pain and fear. "Please," I choked out. "I'll do anything. Just don't kill me." The man crouched down, his face inches from mine. "Anything?" he asked, his tone mocking. "That's cute." He stood up and gestured to the masked figure. "Finish it." I don't know what I expected. Maybe a knife, maybe a gun. But when the masked figure reached into their coat and pulled out a roll of duct tape, I realized they weren't going to kill me. Not yet. They wrapped the tape around my wrists and ankles, binding me so tightly I could barely feel my hands. Then they pulled out another Polaroid camera. "Smile," the man said, his grin widening. The flash went off, blinding me for a moment. When my vision cleared, they were holding the photo in front of my face. It was me, tied up on the floor, my face pale and streaked with tears. "You'll make a great souvenir," the man said, slipping the photo into his pocket. "But don't worry, we'll send you a copy." I don't remember much after that. They must have drugged me, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my car. The sun was high in the sky, and my wrists and ankles were raw from where the tape had been. My phone was on the passenger seat, but when I checked it, the video was gone. The texts, the calls, everything, gone. Like none of it had ever happened, but it did. I know it did. and the proof was in the Polaroid that was sitting on my dashboard, staring back at me like a cruel joke. I don't know why they let me go. Maybe they thought I wasn't worth it anymore. Maybe they just wanted to mess with my head. Or maybe the hunt isn't over. Because when I got home, there was another note waiting for me. It was on my kitchen table, written in the same blocky letters as before. See you soon. I was paid $5,000 on the dark web to explore an abandoned underwater facility in the Mariana Trench. What I found was alive. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd find themselves browsing the deep web late at night. But, well, here I am. I'll be honest, I'm not some genius hacker or criminal mastermind. I'm just a guy who got bored of Netflix and TikTok one night and started Googling things like dark web horror stories for fun. You know how it goes. You read a few Reddit threads, watch a couple of creepy YouTube videos with robotic narrators, and suddenly you're downloading Tor at 2 a.m. Because why not? I didn't really expect to find anything when I first started poking around. Most of the marketplaces are scams, the forums are filled with edgy teenagers, and everything else is just weird. But then I found this site. It didn't even have a flashy name, just a plain black background with a blinking cursor that said, "Are you curious enough to make $5,000? I mean, who wouldn't click on that? It felt like one of those spam ads where they promise you a free iPhone if you answer a survey. But this was different. As soon as I clicked, a chat window popped up. No introduction, no username, just a single message. Do you want to make $5,000 tonight? Now, look, I know what you're thinking. This is the part where any sane person would slam their laptop shut and go watch cat videos. But $5,000 isn't exactly pocket change for me. I've been working a dead-end job at Starbucks for months, and my bank account has been living on life support since I graduated college. So, against every instinct I had, I replied, "What's the catch?" The response was almost instant. "We need you to document your exploration of an abandoned underwater facility. It's located in the Mariana Trench. You'll be provided with transportation, equipment, and detailed instructions. All expenses covered. Payment upon completion." Okay. What the hell? This had to be a joke, right? Or some elaborate prank for a YouTube channel. But the more I read, the more real it sounded. They said I'd be flown out to Guam, where a specialized diving team would take me to the site. I wouldn't need any prior experience. They claimed the equipment was idiot-proof. And, as if they knew I'd still be skeptical, they added this: half the payment will be sent up front. Check your account. Sure enough, when I logged into my bank app, there it was, $2,500, just like that. No contracts, no phone calls, just cold, hard cash. That's when I realized these people weren't playing around. The next day, I got an email with a plane ticket attached. It was for a flight to Guam, business class no less. The instructions were ridiculously vague. All it said was to pack light and bring a sturdy pair of boots. Oh, and there was one more thing that stood out. Do not share this with anyone, or the deal is off. I didn't tell my family, didn't tell my friends. I mean, how do you even explain something like this? Hey Mom, I'm flying halfway across the world to go dive into the deepest part of the ocean for some strangers on the internet. Be back in a few days. Instead, I just said I was going on a work trip. Nobody questioned it. I don't think anyone wanted to. When I arrived in Guam, there was a black SUV waiting for me outside the airport. The driver didn't say a word, just handed me a blindfold and motioned for me to put it on. I almost laughed. This was straight out of a bad spy movie, but I went along with it because, well, $5,000. We drove for what felt like hours. I could hear the ocean, smell the salt in the air, but I had no idea where we were. Eventually, the car stopped, and the driver led me to what I assumed was a boat. The engine roared to life, and we were off. I didn't get to see anything until we reached the dive site. When they finally took the blindfold off, my stomach dropped. We were floating above an industrial-looking platform in the middle of nowhere. Massive cranes and steel beams jutted out of the water, rusted and worn from years of neglect. It looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. One of the crew members handed me a wetsuit and some kind of high-tech helmet. It wasn't like the scuba gear you see on TV. This thing looked more like a space helmet. Thick glass, blinking lights, and a built-in comm system. "You ready?" the guy asked. He had a heavy Russian accent, and his face was all business. I nodded, even though I was absolutely not ready. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out. But before I could change my mind, they were strapping an oxygen tank to my back and lowering me into the water. The descent was unnerving. The first few minutes weren't so bad. The water was clear, and I could still see sunlight filtering through. But the deeper we went, the darker it got. The pressure around me felt like a vice, and the only sounds were my own breathing and the faint hum of the oxygen system. After about 10 minutes, I saw it. The facility. It was massive, easily the size of a shopping mall. Huge metal structures loomed out of the darkness, covered in barnacles and strange, glowing algae. There were no windows, just long, empty corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The whole place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. "You're at the entry point," the voice crackled in my helmet. "Proceed inside." The main entrance was a huge steel door, half submerged in sand. It took me a few tries to push it open, but eventually it gave way. Inside, the water was still and murky, and the temperature dropped by at least 10 degrees. My flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, but I could make out rusted machinery, broken pipes, and something else. Scratch marks. They were everywhere. Long, deep gouges in the metal walls, like something with claws had been trying to escape or get in. That's when I noticed the cameras. They were mounted on the ceiling, motionless and covered in grime, but I could feel them watching me. "Keep moving," the voice in my helmet said. I hesitated. Something about this place felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be here. But $5,000 was a lot of money, so I took a deep breath and kept going. The further I went, the worse it got. There were rooms filled with old lab equipment, beakers, microscopes, strange-looking computers. Most of it was shattered or corroded, but some of it looked disturbingly new. And then there were the noises. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the ocean, but it wasn't. It was faint, but I could hear something moving in the distance. A low, scraping sound, like metal being dragged across the floor. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Is someone else down here?" I asked. The voice didn't respond. That's when I realized something. The cameras weren't broken, they were moving. I don't know if I was imagining things, or if the adrenaline was just playing tricks on me, but the second I saw those cameras turn toward me, I felt like I'd made a terrible mistake. It wasn't just a small tilt or glitch. These things moved with intent, like they knew I was there, like something or someone was watching me. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and I swear I could feel the weight of a dozen invisible eyes boring into me. I thought about turning back, right then and there, but the voice in my helmet, cold, detached, mechanical, barked at me again. Keep moving. Proceed to Sector B7. Sector B7. I hadn't even seen a map of this place, but something told me I wasn't going to like whatever was in that sector. I forced myself to move forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The floor beneath me was uneven, littered with debris, broken glass, chunks of metal, and something soft, something squishy. I shined my flashlight down and immediately regretted it. There was a shoe, a single mud-caked sneaker, just sitting there in the middle of the hallway. It looked new, too new. The laces were still tied, and the sole was barely worn. Beside it was a smear of something dark and oily, leading off into the shadows. My breathing hitched. I tried to tell myself it was just debris, just some random garbage left behind when this place was abandoned. But my gut knew better. Someone had been here. Someone recently. The hallway opened into a massive chamber. The ceiling was high, disappearing into the darkness above, and the walls were lined with rows of glass tanks. They looked like oversized aquariums, but they weren't filled with water. No, the liquid inside was thicker, darker, like tar or ink, and whatever was floating in it wasn't fish. I approached one of the tanks cautiously, shining my flashlight through the grime on the glass. At first, I thought it was empty, but then I saw it, a faint, shadowy outline, barely visible in the murky liquid. It was curled up, motionless, but as I got closer, I could make out limbs, too many limbs. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a bundle of cables on the floor. My brain was screaming at me to leave, to get the hell out of there, but my body wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck in some kind of waking nightmare, my legs frozen as my eyes darted from tank to tank. Most of them were empty, but a few held things, creatures. I don't even know how to describe them. They were all twisted, deformed, like someone had taken bits and pieces of different animals and mashed them together into some sick experiment. One of them had what looked like the head of a horse, but with gills on its neck. Another had long, spindly arms that ended in claws, its face pressed against the glass, as if it were trying to get out. I heard a faint hum, and the tanks lit up, one by one, as if someone or something was turning them on. The light from inside cast eerie shadows on the walls, and that's when I noticed the writing. Scrawled across the glass in what looked like blood or rust were words, short phrases, almost like warnings. Don't wake them. It sees everything. We couldn't stop it. My flashlight flickered again, and I heard it, the scraping sound from earlier. Except this time, it was closer, much closer. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The hallway behind me was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It echoed through the chamber, metallic and hollow, like claws dragging against steel. And then I saw it, a shadow, darting just out of the corner of my vision. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky and muffled by the helmet. I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't get one. But the shadow moved again, faster this time, weaving between the tanks like it was toying with me. "Proceed to Sector B7, the voice in my helmet repeated, more insistent now. "Something's down here," I said. trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not alone." The voice didn't respond. Of course it didn't. Whoever these people were, they didn't care about my safety. They just wanted me to keep going, to reach whatever was waiting in Sector B7. I kept moving, my flashlight darting around wildly. The corridors were getting narrower now, the walls closing in, as if the facility itself was trying to swallow me. The air, or whatever passes for air that deep underwater, felt heavy, suffocating, and the scratches on the walls were getting worse, deeper, fresher. At one point, I passed a door that had been ripped clean off its hinges. Inside was a small room, the floor littered with papers and shattered glass. I picked up one of the papers, my gloved hands trembling as I read the faded text. Subject 032 has escaped containment. Initiating lockdown procedures. All personnel are to evacuate immediately. Do not engage the subject under any circumstances. I dropped the paper and backed out of the room, my breathing quick and shallow. I didn't want to know what Subject 032 was. I didn't want to know what it could do. But as I turned to leave, I saw something scrawled on the wall, written in what looked like claw marks. "It lives." The lights in the hallway flickered, and for a split second I saw it. A figure, tall, emaciated, its limbs unnaturally long. It was standing at the end of the corridor, its head tilted at an impossible angle, and then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The corridors twisted and turned, each one looking more identical than the last. I passed more tanks, more scrawled warnings, but I didn't stop to look. The scraping sound was back, louder and more frantic, like whatever was chasing me was gaining ground. I burst into a large room, slamming the door shut behind me. It was some kind of control center, filled with old monitors and equipment that looked decades out of date. But some of the screens were still on, flickering with static. One of them showed a live feed of the chamber I'd just been in. I could see the tanks, the shadows moving between them, and then the camera panned up, slowly, to show the ceiling. There were bodies, dozens of them, strung up like marionettes, their limbs twisted and bent. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terror, their mouths open in silent screams. And then, one of them moved. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The scraping sound was back, louder than ever, and this time it was coming from inside the room. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hands, and there it was, the thing I'd seen in the hallway. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and its mouth split open in a grotesque grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I didn't have time to scream. I don't remember much about what happened when that thing lunged at me. My instincts took over, and everything became a blur of panic and adrenaline. All I know is I threw myself backward, slamming into one of the consoles hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. The thing didn't follow right away. It just stood there, watching me. Its head twitched erratically, like it was trying to figure out what I was. Its limbs were long, impossibly thin, almost skeletal, and they moved in this unnatural, jerky way, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. And then it charged. I dove to the side, just as it crashed into the console, where I'd been standing. Sparks erupted from the machinery, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. The noise was deafening, and for a split second, I thought maybe I'd blinded it. But when I looked back, it was already turning toward me again, that same twisted grin stretched across its face. There was no way I could fight it. This wasn't some late-night bar fight or a drunk dude stumbling into Starbucks at 6 a.m. demanding a latte. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist. My only option was to run. I spotted another door on the far side of the room and bolted for it. My boots slipped on the wet, rusted floor, and I nearly fell flat on my face. Behind me, I could hear the creature scraping and clawing at the walls, shrieking like some kind of hellish bird. It wasn't just chasing me, it was hunting me. The door led to another hallway, narrower and more claustrophobic than the last. The walls were lined with pipes that hissed and groaned as I ran past, spewing out bursts of steam that burned my arms through the wetsuit. The air was thick, suffocating, and the stench of salt and decay was almost unbearable. My flashlight flickered again, and I cursed under my breath. The last thing I needed was to be left in the dark with that. I rounded a corner and nearly ran headfirst into another door. This one was massive, reinforced with thick steel bars and marked with a faded spray-painted warning. Do not open under any circumstances. Great. That's always comforting. Behind me, the scraping sound grew louder, closer. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the wheel on the door and turned it as hard as I could. It resisted at first, rusted in place after who knows how many years, but eventually it gave way. I pushed the door open just enough to slip through and slammed it shut behind me, spinning the wheel to lock it tight. For a moment, there was silence. Nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the faint hum of the facility. Then the pounding started. The thing was on the other side of the door, slamming into it with enough force to make the entire frame rattle. I backed away, my flashlight aimed at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any second. But it didn't. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it had started, and the silence that followed was somehow worse. I turned to face the room I'd just entered, and immediately wished I hadn't. It was massive, easily the largest space I'd seen so far. The walls were lined with rows of what looked like prison cells, each one sealed with thick glass doors. Inside were people, or at least they used to be people. Their bodies were bloated and pale, their skin covered in strange black growths that pulsed faintly, almost like they were alive. Some of them were missing limbs, their stumps ending in jagged, bloody messes. Others had their faces pressed against the glass, their empty eyes staring out at nothing. I stepped closer to one of the cells, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The person inside, or what was left of them, twitched slightly, their head turning toward me. For a split second, our eyes met, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Their mouth moved, but no sound came out. And then I realized they weren't looking at me. They were looking past me. I spun around just in time to see the door I'd just locked fly off its hinges. The thing was back, and this time it wasn't alone. Two more creatures emerged from the shadows, their bodies just as emaciated and twisted as the first. They moved in perfect unison, their heads tilting at the same unnatural angle as they stared at me. For a moment, none of us moved. It was like they were waiting for something, some kind of signal. And then the lights went out. I don't mean my flashlight. I mean the entire facility. 1 second, everything was bathed in that sickly, fluorescent glow, and the next, I was plunged into total darkness. I could hear them moving, their claws scraping against the floor as they circled me. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw one of them just inches away from my face. Its breath was hot and foul, and its eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, were filled with something that could only be described as hunger. I didn't think. I just ran. I don't even know how I found the next door. I was running blind, my arms outstretched as I fumbled through the dark. The creatures were right behind me, their shrieks echoing through the corridor. At one point, I felt something sharp rake across my back, tearing through the wetsuit like paper. The pain was blinding, but I didn't stop. The door wasn't locked, thank God. I threw myself through it and slammed it shut, collapsing against the cold metal frame. My flashlight was barely working now, the beam so weak it was almost useless. But as I looked around, I realized I wasn't alone. There was a figure in the room with me, standing motionless in the corner. At first, I thought it was another one of those creatures, but as my flashlight steadied, I saw it was a man, or what was left of one. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his skin was a sickly shade of gray. He was wearing a tattered lab coat, the name tag still pinned to his chest. Dr. Holland Finch. Who? I started, but my voice caught in my throat. Who are you? The man didn't respond. He just stared at me, his lips trembling as if he was trying to speak. Finally, he raised a shaking hand and pointed at something on the far wall. My flashlight followed his gesture, and I saw it. A massive, rusted control panel covered in switches and levers. Scrawled above it, in large, jagged letters, were the words, "Activate Purge." I didn't need to be told twice. Whatever was down here, whatever this place was, it needed to be destroyed. I staggered to the panel, my hands fumbling over the controls. The switches were stiff, the levers jammed, but I managed to get the system online. A voice crackled over the intercom, cold and robotic. Warning, purge sequence initiated. Evacuate immediately. Behind me, the creatures began to shriek. It wasn't a sound of rage or hunger this time. It was fear. Pure, animalistic fear. They scrambled at the door, clawing and pounding, trying to get in. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. When I turned around, Dr. Finch was gone. The alarms blared as I stumbled through the facility, the floor shaking beneath my feet. Whatever the purge was, it was working. The tanks were cracking open, spilling their dark, viscous contents onto the floor. The creatures inside were writhing, their distorted bodies twitching and convulsing as they dissolved into the sludge. The entire place was coming apart at the seams. I reached the exit just as the first explosion rocked the facility. The blast knocked me off my feet, and for a moment, I thought I was going to die down there. But then I saw it, the open hatch, the faint glow of the surface far above. I pushed myself up, every muscle in my body screaming in protest, and started climbing. As I ascended, I heard one last sound from below. It was faint, almost drowned out by the chaos, but I'll never forget it. It was laughter. When I finally breached the surface, it felt like I was being born again, gasping for air and choking on salt water. The night was eerily calm, the ocean's surface glassy and black under a moonless sky. The platform where the boat had dropped me off was just barely visible in the distance, lit by a few faint, flickering floodlights. I felt the weight of the entire experience clawing at my mind, like my brain was desperately trying to file what had happened into some logical category, and failing miserably. I wanted to cry, to scream, to do something, but I couldn't. I floated there, completely numb, while my brain replayed the last few hours on an endless, sickening loop. The tanks, the creatures, the cameras. And that laughter, it wasn't human. It couldn't have been. It echoed in my skull, a sound that shouldn't exist, a sound that still felt alive somehow, like it was following me, digging its claws into my psyche and refusing to let go. I managed to swim back to the platform, though I don't remember much of it. My limbs felt heavy, like they were weighed down by cement, and my mind kept flashing back to that thing, the one that had chased me through the facility. What if it had followed me? What if it was still down there, waiting for me to come back? Or worse, what if it wasn't down there anymore? By the time I pulled myself onto the platform, my body was trembling uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from pure, unfiltered terror. The platform was empty. No boat, no crew, no sign of the people who had brought me here. Just the rusted metal grates and the faint hum of machinery coming from somewhere deep below. I staggered toward the control station at the edge of the platform, hoping, praying that I'd find a way to call for help. The station was little more than a rusted shack, barely standing against the wind. Inside, there was a single console, old and decrepit, with a cracked monitor and a tangled mess of wires spilling out from underneath. I slammed my hand against the buttons, shouting into the static-filled speaker, "Hello? Can anyone hear me? I need help. Please, I need to get out of here." No response. I hit the buttons again, harder this time. "Please, I'm still out here. The facility, it's..." I stopped myself. How could I even explain what had happened? Who would believe me? My voice broke as I leaned against the console, tears streaming down my face. That's when the screen flickered to life. The video feed was grainy, the image distorted by static and digital noise, but I recognized what I was looking at immediately. It was the facility. The cameras were still active, showing the chaos unfolding below. The tanks were ruptured, the creatures inside thrashing violently as the black sludge spilled out onto the floors. Fires raged in some of the corridors, and thick smoke billowed through the vents. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the people. There were dozens of them, scientists maybe, or workers, running through the facility, their faces twisted in fear and panic. I had no idea where they'd come from or how they'd survived down there for so long, but it didn't matter. They weren't going to survive much longer. The creatures were everywhere, ripping through the facility like rabid animals. I watched in horror as one of the scientists tripped and fell, only to be pounced on by one of the emaciated monsters. The feed cut out before I could see what happened next, but the scream that came through the speaker was enough. I backed away from the console, my stomach churning. The feed switched to another camera, this one showing the control room where I'd initiated the purge. The machines were sparking, flames licking at the walls, and in the center of it all was Dr. Finch. He was standing perfectly still, his face illuminated by the flickering light. His lips were moving, like he was chanting something, but no sound came through. And then he turned to face the camera. His eyes locked onto mine, and I swear to God he smiled. I stumbled out of the shack, my mind racing. I didn't know what was happening anymore, what was real, what wasn't. All I knew was that I had to get off that platform. I scanned the horizon, desperate for any sign of a boat or rescue, but there was nothing. Just endless black water stretching out in every direction. That's when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere beneath the platform. At first, I thought it was the sound of the machinery shutting down, a side effect of the purge. But as the thumping grew louder, more deliberate, I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was alive. I ran to the edge of the platform, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The water below was eerily still, almost like it was holding its breath. But then I saw it, something massive, shifting just beneath the surface. The water rippled and churned, and for a moment, I thought I saw eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly in the darkness, staring up at me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't from this world. It couldn't be. It was too big, too unnatural. I could feel its presence in my bones, like the very air around it was bending and warping under its weight. The platform shook violently, knocking me off my feet. The thumping had turned into a deafening roar, and the water below began to boil, thick black tendrils rising up like smoke. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to find some kind of escape, but there was nowhere to go. The platform was disintegrating beneath me, the metal groaning and buckling as the creature below tore it apart. And then I saw it. A ladder, bolted to the side of the platform, leading down to a small maintenance raft. It wasn't much, but it was my only chance. I didn't think. I just ran. The climb down was agonizing, each rung slick with seawater and rust. The creature roared again, the sound vibrating through the metal and nearly shaking me loose. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept climbing, my hands and feet moving on autopilot. When I finally reached the raft, I untied it as fast as I could and pushed off from the platform. The motor sputtered to life, and I steered the raft away, glancing back only once. The platform was collapsing in on itself, huge sections of metal and machinery disappearing into the boiling water. And then, for just a moment, I saw it, the creature in all its terrible glory. It was indescribable, a mass of writhing limbs and eyes, its body shifting and contorting like it was made of liquid. It rose up from the water, towering over the platform, its many mouths opening in unison to let out a bone-shaking scream. And then it was gone, dragging the remains of the facility down into the abyss with it. I don't know how long I floated out there. Hours, maybe. Days. Time had lost all meaning. The horizon never changed. The water never stopped being black and still. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the faint echo of that creature's roar in my ears. Eventually, I was found. A cargo ship spotted my raft and pulled me aboard. I tried to explain what had happened, but the crew just looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. They radioed for medical help, and the next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, with no idea how I'd gotten there. The doctors told me I was dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from extreme exhaustion. They asked me questions about where I'd been, what I'd seen, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Who would believe me? Who would believe any of this? A week later, I checked my bank account. The rest of the money had been deposited. $2,500 for surviving hell, for witnessing something no human should ever see. And then I got the email. We know you're alive. We'll be in touch soon. After the email, I did what anyone in my position would do. I tried to disappear. I deleted every trace of myself online, canceled my social media accounts, and stopped using my phone for anything other than emergencies. I moved out of my apartment in the city, leaving everything behind, and rented a cheap, run-down house in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors, no connections, just me and the silence. But it wasn't enough. I knew they'd come for me eventually. Whoever they were, the people who had sent me into that nightmare, the people who knew what I had seen, what I had survived. I spent my nights staring out the window, watching for shadows that didn't belong. Every creak in the floorboards, every distant sound of an engine made my heart race. I slept with a knife under my pillow. Not that it would have made a difference. And then the dreams started. At first, they were just fragments, flashes of the facility, the tanks, the creatures, that thing rising from the depths, its many eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. But as the nights went on, the dreams became more vivid, more real. I could feel the cold water pressing against my skin, the weight of the ocean crushing down on me. I could hear the scraping of claws on metal, the faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And the laughter, always the laughter. I started waking up in a cold sweat, gasping for air, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. But the worst part wasn't the dreams. It was the feeling that followed me into the waking world. That feeling of being watched, of not being alone. No matter where I went, no matter how empty the house was, I could feel it. Eyes, watching, waiting. A few weeks after the email, I got a package. It was sitting on my doorstep when I woke up one morning, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. My stomach sank the moment I saw it. I wanted to leave it there, to burn it, to pretend it didn't exist. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. Inside was a single item, a small black USB drive. No note, no explanation, just the drive. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting it to be rigged with some kind of virus or spyware. Instead, there was just one file, a video. The video started with static, the screen flickering as faint shapes began to emerge. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. The facility. The camera panned slowly through the dark, empty corridors, the only sound the faint hum of machinery in the background. At first, it was just footage of the aftermath. Broken tanks, spilled sludge, claw marks on the walls. But then it changed. The camera moved into one of the larger chambers, and I felt my stomach drop. The bodies were still there, strung up like marionettes, their limbs twisted and broken. But they weren't dead. Their heads turned slowly toward the camera, their mouths moving as if they were trying to speak. The video had no sound, but I swear I could hear their voices in my head, whispering, pleading. The camera zoomed in on one of the bodies, a man, his face pale and swollen, his eyes bloodshot. His lips formed a single, unmistakable word. Run. I slammed the laptop shut and threw the USB drive across the room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but all I could do was sit there, frozen in terror. That's when the lights went out. The house was plunged into complete darkness. The only sound, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I grabbed the knife from under my pillow and stood up, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My phone was dead. The power was out. I was completely cut off. And then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scraping coming from somewhere inside the house. I backed into the corner of the room, clutching the knife like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The scraping grew louder, closer, and I could hear something else now. Breathing, wet, labored breathing, like someone or something was struggling to hold itself together. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" No response. The scraping stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, a shadow began to emerge from the darkness. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs contorted in ways that made my stomach churn. Its head tilted to the side, and I could see faintly glowing eyes staring back at me. It was one of them, one of the creatures from the facility. But it wasn't alone. More shadows began to appear, crawling out of the darkness like spiders. They surrounded me, their eyes glinting in the faint moonlight that seeped through the cracks in the windows. I could hear their claws tapping against the floor, their teeth clicking together as they moved closer. I don't know what happened next. Everything is a blur. I remember screaming, swinging the knife wildly, but it was like trying to fight off a hurricane with a toothpick. The creatures didn't even flinch. They just kept coming, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were savoring the moment. And then, just as they were about to reach me, they stopped. The room was filled with a deafening silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. The creatures stared at me for a moment, their glowing eyes unblinking, and then, one by one, they began to back away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. I was left alone in the darkness, trembling and clutching the knife like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I don't know why they spared me. Maybe they were just toying with me. Maybe they wanted me to suffer. Or maybe they were waiting for something, for someone. The email came the next morning. You've seen too much, but we're not done with you yet. I deleted it immediately, but I knew it didn't matter. They knew where I was. They knew everything. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how well I hid, they would find me. It's been weeks now, and I can feel it closing in. The dreams are getting worse, the whispers louder. I keep seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, flickers of movement that disappear when I turn to look. I know they're watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the laughter, it's back, louder than ever. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Maybe I should just end it, spare myself whatever they have planned. But part of me knows that even death wouldn't be an escape. Not from this. Because whatever I unleashed down there in the Mariana Trench, whatever I saw in that godforsaken facility, it's not done with me. Not yet. I discovered a secret Disney Plus series hidden on the dark web. The characters seem to know I'm watching. Okay, so before I get into this, I just want to say that I know how it's going to sound. Like, if I were reading this, I'd think it was total BS too. But I swear, every word of this is true. And if you're the type of person who likes to mess around on the dark web, or thinks it's all fun and games, don't. Trust me on this one. It started about a month ago. It was a Friday night, and I was doing what I always do when I have no plans, binge watching Disney Plus. I've been a huge Disney fan since I was a kid, and honestly, their streaming library is chef's kiss. I had just finished watching The Mandalorian. Yes, I'm late to the party, sue me, and was scrolling through the app, trying to figure out what to watch next. That's when I noticed something weird. In the recommended for you section, there was a thumbnail for a show I'd never seen before. It didn't have one of those bright, polished Disney thumbnails like everything else. Instead, it looked off. The title was just one word: roommates. The thumbnail showed two animated characters sitting in what looked like a dimly lit dorm room, but their faces were blurred, like when they censor people on TV. It gave me this weird feeling, but I figured it was some new indie-style series Disney was experimenting with. Curiosity got the best of me, so I clicked it. I didn't sleep at all that night after watching the first episode. It wasn't just the weird vibe or Lila looking directly at me. It was the way she said it. Why are you still watching this? Her voice didn't sound like a normal cartoon character. It was too flat, too real, almost like a voice note someone had recorded on their phone. I couldn't get it out of my head. And yeah, I probably should have stopped there, but something about it hooked me. It was like this itch I couldn't scratch. I needed to know more. The next day, I opened Disney Plus again. My hands were actually shaking when I navigated to the continue watching section, half expecting the show to be gone. But no, it was still there. Roommates, Episode 2. The thumbnail for the second episode was darker than the first one. It showed Jake and Lila standing in a hallway, but everything around them was dim, like it was lit by a single flickering bulb. Their faces were still slightly blurred, but now their eyes looked sharper, more focused. I hesitated for a long time before I hit play, but eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. Big mistake. The second episode picked up right where the first one left off, with Jake and Lila in their dorm room. Jake was eating McDonald's fries, and Lila was scrolling on her phone, but the tone was completely different. The cheerful background music from the first episode was gone, replaced by this low, droning sound that made my skin crawl. The camera was angled weirdly, too, like it was being filmed from a corner of the room, almost like a security camera. Lila suddenly put down her phone and said, "I had the dream again." Jake looked up from his fries, frowning. The one with the... Before he could finish his sentence, the screen glitched, just like it had in the first episode. Static crackled for a few seconds, and when the video came back, everything looked different. The colors were muted, the dorm room was messier, and both Jake and Lila looked tired. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their movements were slower, less cartoonish, more human. The hidden names. Jake asked, "Did you hear it this time?" Lila nodded, her hands shaking as she picked at the edge of her hoodie. It was saying names again, over and over. I couldn't wake up. "What names?" Jake pressed. Lila didn't answer right away. She just stared at the floor, her eyes darting around like she was trying to remember something. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she whispered, "Yours." And someone else's. The camera zoomed in on Jake's face, and for a split second, I thought I saw his expression flicker. Like, literally flicker, as if someone was switching between two faces, his cartoon face and a real one. It happened so fast that I thought I imagined it, but then Lila looked directly at the camera again. "You need to stop watching this," she said. I actually screamed. Not like a little gasp, but a full-on, out-loud scream. The way she said it was even creepier this time, more urgent, like she was begging me to stop. I paused the episode and stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't some clever fourth wall break. It felt personal, like she knew I was sitting there in my room, glued to my laptop. And then I noticed something horrifying. My reflection in the black screen of my laptop wasn't alone. There was someone standing behind me, the stranger in the reflection. I spun around so fast, I nearly fell off my chair, but there was no one there. My room was empty. I checked every corner, opened my closet, even looked under my bed, but I was alone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I looked back at my laptop, the episode had started playing again, on its own. Lila was pacing back and forth in the dorm room, muttering to herself. The camera followed her movements like someone was holding it, but Jake was nowhere to be seen. Then she stopped pacing and said, "He's here." The camera panned to the dorm room door, which was slightly ajar. Outside, the hallway was pitch black, except for a faint red glow at the very end. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the speakers, getting louder and louder. Lila backed away from the door, her breathing ragged. "Jake!" she called out, her voice trembling. The footsteps stopped. A name I shouldn't have heard. For a moment, everything was silent, and then a deep, distorted voice came from the hallway. "We see you." My name. Yes, it said my name. My actual real-life name. I slammed my laptop shut so hard I thought I broke it. My heart was pounding so fast I thought I was going to pass out. How the hell did it know my name? I hadn't entered any personal information into Disney Plus, and there was no way the show could have accessed my account details. Right? I wanted to believe it was some kind of glitch, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was something else. Something worse. The email. I didn't open Disney Plus again for a week after that. I couldn't even bring myself to turn on my laptop. But just when I thought I was starting to calm down, I got an email. It was from a random, untraceable address, just a string of numbers and letters. The subject line said, "Keep watching." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email had no text, just a single attachment, a screenshot from roommates. It showed Jake and Lila sitting in their dorm room, but they weren't alone. There was a third figure in the background, standing in the shadows. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie that covered most of his face, but his eyes were glowing red. Beneath the screenshot was a single line of text. Episode 3 is waiting. The shadows are moving. I don't know why I clicked on it. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that this wasn't real. But when I opened Disney Plus, Roommates was back in my watch list. I clicked on episode 3, and this time, the thumbnail showed Jake and Lila standing in what looked like a parking garage. The lighting was dim, and there was a dark stain on the floor behind them. The episode started with Jake and Lila arguing about something, but their voices were muffled, like the audio was being distorted. As the camera panned around the room, I realized it wasn't their dorm anymore. It was my room, my actual room. Every detail was identical. The posters on the wall, the cluttered desk, even the coffee mug sitting next to my laptop. I froze, my stomach twisting in knots. This wasn't just some creepy coincidence. Someone had been in my house. Then the camera shifted to the window, and I saw him again, the man in the hoodie, standing outside, staring in. I slammed my laptop shut and called the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. No footprints outside, no signs of forced entry. Nothing. But I know what I saw. And every night since then, I felt like someone's watching me. I keep hearing footsteps outside my window, and sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can hear someone breathing in the dark. If you ever come across a show called Roommates, do yourself a favor and stay far, far away. Because once you watch it, it's not just a show anymore. It's a doorway. And once it opens, there's no closing it. I wish I could tell you that I stopped watching the series after that last episode. I wish I could say I deleted Disney Plus, moved to another city, or smashed my laptop into a million pieces. But no, I didn't. Somehow, against all logic and every ounce of self-preservation, I kept watching. I didn't want to, but it felt like the show wanted me to. It was like an itch I couldn't stop scratching, even though I knew it was making everything worse. After the third episode, where I saw my room recreated in horrifying detail, I didn't sleep for days. I kept my lights on 24/7, triple-checked every lock in the house, and stopped going out after dark. But it didn't matter. The sense of dread followed me everywhere. Every time I walked past a window, I half expected to see the man in the hoodie staring in. Every time I looked at my reflection, I was scared I'd see someone standing behind me. And then, one night, my phone buzzed. The midnight notification. It was around 3 a.m., and I was lying in bed, scrolling aimlessly through TikTok to distract myself. I hadn't opened Disney Plus in over a week, but the app notification that popped up made my blood run cold. New episode available. Roommates, episode 4. I stared at the notification, my chest tightening. It felt like the app was taunting me, daring me to come back. My thumb hovered over the notification for what felt like an eternity. I kept telling myself not to click it, that this was exactly what they wanted. But then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. Watch it, or we'll come inside. The 4th episode. I don't even remember opening the app. 1 second I was staring at that message, and the next, the Disney Plus logo was glowing on my screen. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone, but I clicked on episode 4. The thumbnail was horrifying. It showed Jake and Lila sitting in what looked like a Starbucks, but their faces were no longer blurred. They were completely blank. No eyes, no mouths, just smooth, featureless skin. And in the background, sitting at a table near the window, was the man in the hoodie. His glowing red eyes were the only source of color in the image. The episode started without any intro music. No title card, no cheerful jingles, just silence. Jake and Lila were sitting at the Starbucks, staring straight ahead. They weren't moving, not even blinking. The camera slowly panned around the room, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The Starbucks wasn't just any Starbucks. It was my Starbucks, the one a block away from my house. I recognized the layout, the posters on the wall, even the mismatched chairs in the corner. Lila suddenly turned to Jake and said, "He's here." Jake nodded, his head tilting unnaturally to one side, like a puppet being yanked by its strings. "I know. He's watching us." I almost dropped my phone. They weren't talking about the man in the hoodie. They were talking about me. Breaking the 4th wall, the camera shifted, slowly zooming in on the front door of the Starbucks. The glass door swung open, and the man in the hoodie walked in. He moved so smoothly, it was almost like he was gliding. Every head in the Starbucks turned to watch him, but their faces weren't normal anymore. They were distorted, stretched, and warped like something out of a nightmare. Their eyes were pitch black, and their mouths were too wide, twisted into eerie, unnatural smiles. The man walked straight up to Jake and Lila's table and sat down. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at them. And then, in that same deep, distorted voice I'd heard in episode 2, he said, "It's time." Lila nodded, her blank face turning toward the camera, toward me. "Are you ready?" she asked. Before I could process what was happening, the screen glitched again. This time, the distortion didn't stop. The video cut in and out, showing flashes of images that didn't make any sense. There was a knife lying on a blood-stained floor, a door with scratch marks all over it, a hand pressing against a fogged-up window, and then, for just a split second, there was a photo of me. It wasn't an animated version of me. It was a real photo, one I didn't recognize. I was sitting at my desk, wearing the same hoodie I had on that night. But the most terrifying part, the photo wasn't taken from my webcam or phone. It was taken from behind me, the intruder. I slammed my phone down and ran out of my room, my heart racing. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in. I grabbed a kitchen knife and checked every room in the house, every closet, every corner, but no one was there. When I finally worked up the courage to go back to my room, I found my phone lying face up on my bed. The screen was still on, but the Disney Plus app was closed. Instead, there was a text message waiting for me. You can't stop now. Episode 5 is coming soon. The 5th episode. I didn't want to open Disney Plus again, but by now, it didn't feel like I had a choice. It wasn't just a show anymore. It was real. They were inside my life, my house, my head. I waited for days, jumping at every little noise, checking over my shoulder every time I left the house. And then, just like before, I got the notification. New episode available. Roommates, episode 5. This time, the thumbnail was just black. No characters, no background, just an empty void. The episode title was a single word: home. The episode that crossed the line. The episode opened with a live-action shot of a dark hallway. My hallway. The camera moved slowly, as if someone was walking through my house, filming everything. I could hear faint whispers in the background, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The camera stopped in front of my bedroom door, which was slightly open. Inside, I could see myself sitting at my desk, watching the episode on my phone. The whispers got louder, more frantic, as the camera pushed the door open. I watched, frozen in terror, as the man in the hoodie stepped into the room. His glowing red eyes pierced through the darkness as he moved closer and closer to me, to the version of me on the screen, and then he stopped. He turned to face the camera. Me. You can't run, he said, his voice echoing through my headphones. We're already here. At that exact moment, the lights in my room flickered. My phone screen went black, and then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. The sound of someone breathing. I can't escape. I don't know how this ends. I haven't opened Disney Plus since that night, but the show won't leave me alone. The notifications keep coming. The text messages won't stop. And every time I try to delete the app, it reappears. Last night, I found a photo on my phone that I didn't take. It was a picture of me, asleep in bed. If you ever come across a show called Roommates, do not watch it. Because once you do, you're not just a viewer, you're part of the story. And they won't stop until they've written the ending. I haven't slept in days. Not really. Every time I close my eyes, I hear whispers. Soft at first, like a faint breeze, but then louder and closer until it feels like someone's leaning over me, speaking directly into my ear. The words don't make sense, just fragments of sentences and random names. Sometimes I hear my own name mixed in with them, which is enough to snap me awake, drenched in sweat. After what happened in episode 5, I swore I was done with Roommates. I deleted Disney Plus, smashed my laptop, and even switched my phone for a cheap burner model. But no matter what I do, the show finds a way back. It's like it's infected my life. Last night, I woke up to find my TV turned on, even though I don't remember turning it on before I went to bed. It was playing static. Not the usual kind, though. This static was layered, almost textured. I could see faint outlines in the noise, like shapes moving in and out of focus. Then the static cleared, and I saw a still image. Jake and Lila sitting at a dining table. My dining table. And in the corner of the screen, barely visible in the shadows, was the man in the hoodie. The missing time. This is the part where things get blurry. I don't remember turning the TV off or even getting up from bed. The next thing I knew, it was morning. and I was sitting at the dining table, the same one from the episode, except my hands were shaking and there were deep scratch marks carved into the wood in front of me. They were fresh, so fresh that little curls of wood were still scattered across the table. It took me a moment to realize I was holding a knife, not one of my kitchen knives, but a long, thin blade I didn't recognize. There was something written on the blade, scratched into the metal. At first, I thought it was random letters, but as I tilted it toward the light, I could make it out. Keep watching. The voices in the walls. I don't know why I didn't call the cops right then and there. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that they wouldn't believe me. I mean, what was I going to say? Hi, officer. I think an animated series on Disney Plus is stalking me. Yeah. No. Instead, I locked all the doors, boarded up the windows, and spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. But by nightfall, the whispers started again. This time, they weren't just in my head. They were everywhere. I could hear them coming from the walls, the floor, even the pipes. At first, it was just random noises, like faint scratching or muffled voices. But then the words started to form. I heard Jake's voice first. "We're almost there," he whispered. Then Lila. "Why are you running?" And then the deep, distorted voice of the man in the hoodie. "You can't hide from us." The glitch in the frame. I grabbed my burner phone, desperate for any kind of distraction, and started scrolling through Instagram. For a moment, it worked. I even started to convince myself that I was imagining things. But then I noticed something weird in one of the posts. It was a picture of a crowded street, something random that someone I barely know had posted. But in the background of the photo, I saw two familiar figures, Jake and Lila. They were standing side by side, staring straight at the camera, at me. I scrolled past it as fast as I could, my hands shaking, but the next post was even worse. It was another random photo, this time of someone's living room. And there, sitting on the couch, was the man in the hoodie. His face was hidden, but his glowing red eyes were unmistakable. I kept scrolling, but every photo I saw was the same. Jake, Lila, and the hooded man, appearing in the background of every single picture. It didn't matter who posted it, or what the picture was supposed to be. They were always there, watching. And then my phone buzzed. A new notification. New episode available. Roommates. Episode 6. The final warning. I don't know what possessed me to open it. Maybe I thought it would make the whispers stop, or maybe I just wanted it to end. Either way, I clicked the notification and the Disney Plus app opened automatically, even though I was sure I'd deleted it. The thumbnail for episode 6 was the most disturbing one yet. It showed my house, not an animated version of my house, but a real photo taken from the street. The episode title was just one word: inside. I wanted to stop. I wanted to throw my phone across the room and run as far away as possible. But my fingers moved on their own, pressing play. The episode started with a live-action shot of my front door. It was nighttime, and the porch light was flickering. The camera slowly moved closer, and as it did, I heard the sound of footsteps. Not from the episode, from inside my house. The screen flashed, and suddenly, the camera was inside. It moved through my living room, down the hallway, and stopped in front of my bedroom door, just like in episode 5. Only this time, the door wasn't open, it was closed, and on the other side, I could hear someone whispering my name. The camera pushed the door open, and the screen went black. The chase. I didn't have time to process what was happening because at that exact moment, I heard the door to my actual bedroom creak open. My heart stopped. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just grabbed the knife from the table and ran. I don't even remember how I got out of the house. All I know is that I ended up on the street, barefoot and shaking, clutching that strange knife like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I looked back at the house, half expecting to see Jake, Lila, or the hooded man standing in the window. But the house was dark and still, like nothing had happened. And then my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The notification wasn't from Disney Plus this time. It was a text message, the same unknown number as before. You can't run forever. The inescapable truth. I don't know what they want from me. Every time I think it's over, they find a new way to pull me back in. I've stopped looking at my phone, stopped going outside, stopped doing anything except sitting in this cheap motel room, waiting for whatever's going to happen next. But deep down, I know there's no escape. They're not just in my devices or my house. They're in my life now, in my mind. And no matter how far I run, they'll always find me. If you ever see a show called Roommates, don't watch it. Don't even click on it. Because once you do, it doesn't matter where you go or what you do, they'll find you. And when they do, they won't stop until they've turned your life into their next episode. I've been running for days now, motel to motel, city to city, and yet somehow, no matter where I go, I can still feel them closing in. It's not paranoia. I know they're here. Every time I check my phone, there's another notification, another text, another haunting reminder that no matter what I do, I can't escape. New episode available. Roommates, episode 7. I stopped opening the notifications after episode 6, but that hasn't stopped them. They've started showing up on every screen I come near. TVs in diner booths, display monitors in gas stations, even digital billboards on the side of the highway. Just this morning, I walked into a Walmart to buy some basic supplies, and there it was, a massive flat screen in the electronics section, playing my story. The footage showed me walking into the very store I was standing in. People around me didn't seem to notice, but the cashier behind the counter did. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost, her lips trembling as she whispered, "They're watching." The series finale, I don't know what compelled me to check Disney Plus again, but as soon as I opened the app, I saw it. The final episode, episode 7. The thumbnail showed me standing in the middle of a dark room, lit only by a single dim spotlight. My clothes were torn, and my face was streaked with dirt and blood. But the most horrifying part was the title of the episode, The End. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself that this was their way of breaking me, that if I didn't watch it, maybe I could finally take control. But then the phone buzzed again, and this time the message wasn't a threat. It was an image, a live photo of my motel room door, taken from the hallway just outside. I heard footsteps. Without thinking, I grabbed the knife from my bag and ran to the door, pressing my ear against it. The footsteps stopped, but I could hear faint breathing on the other side. I whispered, "Who's there?" But no one answered. And then, my phone buzzed again. Inside the episode, the new message said, "Watch it, or we come in." I sat on the floor, shaking, staring at the screen. I knew this was a game I couldn't win. They'd already gotten into my life, my head, my soul. What was one more episode? With trembling hands, I pressed play. The screen went black for a few seconds before cutting to a live-action shot of a room I didn't recognize. The walls were bare and cracked, the floor covered in dark stains. There was no music, no sound at all, except for a faint hum, like the buzz of a dying light bulb. Then the camera panned to the middle of the room, and I saw myself sitting in a chair. It wasn't animated. It was me, my real self, tied up, blood dripping from my face. My chest tightened as I realized this wasn't just a show anymore. This was real. Somehow, they had me. On the screen, I started screaming, thrashing against the ropes binding me to the chair. The camera zoomed in on my face, and I saw the raw terror in my eyes. Then, from the shadows, Jake and Lila stepped into the frame. They weren't cartoon characters anymore. They were real. Too real. Their faces were cold and empty, their movements slow and deliberate. Lila crouched down in front of me, tilting her head like she was studying me. "You should have stopped watching," she said. Jake stood behind her, holding something in his hands. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but as the camera zoomed out, I saw it. A laptop. My laptop. The one I'd smashed weeks ago. They opened it, and the screen lit up with static. The same textured, layered static I'd seen before. And then, in the middle of the screen, I saw my reflection. But it wasn't me anymore. It was them. Jake, Lila, and the hooded man standing right behind them, his glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness, breaking through. The episode didn't stop there. It got worse. Much worse. The camera pulled back to show the man in the hoodie stepping closer to me. He leaned in so close, I thought he might whisper something, but instead, he reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, and then he turned to the camera, to me. "You're next," he said. The screen glitched violently, flashing between the live footage and something else. Scenes of places I recognized. My childhood home, my high school, the office where I used to work. And then it showed something I couldn't process at first. A morgue. Rows of metal tables, each one holding a body covered by a white sheet. The camera moved closer to one of the tables, and as it did, my stomach dropped. The body under the sheet was me. The camera lingered for an agonizingly long time, and then, without warning, the man in the hoodie appeared again. Only this time, he wasn't in the episode. He was behind me. Reality splits. I don't know how to explain what happened next. 1 second, I was watching the screen, and the next, I was inside the episode. The room from the finale wasn't just on the screen anymore. It was around me. The air was thick and heavy, and the walls seemed to pulse like they were alive. I could hear Jake and Lila's voices echoing all around me, but I couldn't see them. "You're part of it now," Jake said. "There's no way out," Lila added. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but I couldn't. My body felt frozen, like I was paralyzed. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man in the hoodie. He was standing in the shadows, holding the knife I'd been carrying all this time. He raised it slowly, and as he did, the whispers grew louder and louder until they were deafening. And then, everything went black. The final twist. I woke up in the same motel room, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The knife was gone, and my phone was lying on the bed next to me. For a moment, I thought it was over, that maybe it had all been a nightmare. But then I noticed something on the screen. It was the Disney Plus app, and in the continue watching section, there was a new thumbnail. It wasn't roommates this time. It was a photo of me, sitting in that chair, blood dripping from my face. The title read, Episode 8, The Beginning. I don't know what they're planning, but I know it's not over. It'll never be over. They've taken everything, my home, my mind, my life, and turned it into their story. And now, I'm just waiting for the next episode to start. If you ever see this show, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't watch it. Don't let it into your life. Because once you do, you're no longer the audience. You're the content.